So my name is Tom Bodart. I am a third-year professor religious with the Congregation of Holy Cross. I'm studying to be a priest. A lot of people don't know that seminarians studying for priesthood actually wear a Roman collar and everything. They're usually tucked away at a place of formation, a seminary, and so not a lot of people see us. So I'm not impersonating a priest. That would be not good. But I'm from Fredericktown, Ohio, which is a small town in Ohio. It's about an hour north of Columbus. It's 1,500 people or so. Lived in the country, and it was great area to grow up in rural Ohio. I have a brother and a sister. I'm the youngest of three. Both my parents were educators. My dad was a high school physics math teacher. My mom taught elementary school. So I studied mechanical engineering at the University of Notre Dame and enjoyed it, but I wasn't really sure that's exactly what I wanted to do because music was always something I was passionate about, and ultimately decided to go with engineering because I really liked the math and science, and I could see myself doing music on the side, but I couldn't see the other way working. I couldn't see myself as a musician doing like engineering problem sets for fun. I had a great internship after my junior year, and that's when it kind of locked in for me that this was a great career path, something that really fit well. So I did that for several years and actually came back to Notre Dame and got a degree in education and studied and taught high school through the ACE, Alliance for Catholic Education program. I think growing up I was always interested in taking stuff apart, much to my parents' chagrin. So I would have a joystick and I would get really mad and would break it, and then I'd have to take it apart and rig up something. So I'd use rubber bands and like pieces of wood so that the joystick would like flop over one way, so I had to keep it upright while still making sure the electrical connection was good. So I love doing stuff like that. I just also I like asking the why question, and I found that I like problem solving as opposed to like scientists are more about asking the why question in order to ask more why questions. I was more interested in asking why questions in order to figure out how to do something with it. So mechanical made the most sense for me because I gravitated towards the stuff I could see. So chemistry, I hated Gen Chem. It was my least favorite because you can't see it, and the stuff you can see you can't put in your mouth to taste, or like really there's no tactile thing there. So that was really important to me. The programming was fun, but not something I was super passionate about. The bridges were fun, but not exactly what I wanted to do. I liked the variety, I guess, of the engineering. Robotics I really liked. I really liked thermodynamics. Yeah, so I went the mechanical route as opposed to electrical. The math was crazy. You're using like square roots of negative numbers. I'm like, I don't know what's going on. Yeah, so I just liked mechanical probably the most. So I was really lucky. I had an internship after my junior year where I worked for Rolls-Royce their civil division. So Rolls-Royce, the corporation, no longer does cars. They sold that industry to BMW in like '97. But they do airplane engines and then applications. So they work in the civil aerospace division. They have a defense aerospace. They have a marine where they're using their generators to propel like submarines and things like that, big boats, and then the energy division. So I was in the civil for my internship in Indianapolis working on small engines for aircraft and helicopters. I was in the quality division, so I was doing a project of getting all the gauges calibrated. So you can imagine there's a lot of critical tolerances for aircraft engines, and there are a lot of gauges that weren't being properly calibrated. So we went through this. I think it was something like 100,000 gauges that summer, getting them all up in the system and like so that they could be recalibrated at a regular schedule. So I did that in the summer. And through that internship, they liked me enough to offer me a job actually October of my senior year. So I had a job going into the spring, which was just incredible. The job was actually in the energy division back in my hometown, which is odd enough, as small as it is. But Rolls-Royce had taken over an energy systems company who had done reciprocating engines. So they liked that technology and acquired that. So I went to Rolls-Royce Energy Systems. I did a rotation program where they were trying to fill some leadership gaps. So they wanted to give me a lot of different experiences. So I'd do like a year in several different things. I started in the customer-facing interface, which is a hard place to start because you're trying to sell stuff you have no idea what you're selling. So I would meet with, so how it would work is our sales guys would be out in the field. They would talk to the BPs and Exxon Mobils of the world, people that need either power for an oil rig offshore or need to pump natural gas through long pipelines. So those our sales guys would talk to them, then they would come to us and say, we need X, Y, Z. And I would take that and I would run it through some sort of program to determine if we had enough power, if our engines were a good fit. And then I'd go to each of our people in our company. So I'd go to the terms and conditions people to see if we could meet the terms, if we needed to move the percentages and how much. I'd talk to the application engineers to see if we could do this, the manufacturers to see if we could do it in time. And then I'd compile all that information and send a bid. It was like a proposal to those companies. And then they would have a couple companies that did that, and then we'd enter into negotiations. So it's kind of, it's really comprehensive. I was really appreciative. I had no idea what I was doing. At least it felt that way sometimes. But it was great to be able to travel to Scotland and Slovakia and have some meetings with some really businessmen that are doing some good work. So that was the first stage. The second stage, I went to the opposite extreme. So I went to the shop floor and I looked at scratches or problems with materials. So there was like a part that was about $60,000. There was a scratch that was 0.007 inches deep, and depending on where the scratch was, we could either keep it and repair it, or we had to scrap the whole thing. So in this particular case, it was right where the bearing sits, and so we had to just scrap it. You know, the thing's whipping around so fast, and if there were any sort of like damages, it would be a huge issue. Like the whole thing could kind of like fall apart. So, so that was the kind of work I did for a year. You know, so definitely the other extreme. But I'd work between the engineers and the shop floor people, and you can imagine there's $1 million of damages every day. So, so it's really important to try to get stuff through the door, but to do it in a way that's safe, that's not going to hurt anybody. Then after that phase, then I went into more of the design layout sort of thing. So I'd look at instrumentation diagrams and check and make sure they're correct, and look at our valves and make sure we had the right one in the right spot. So yeah, so it was all pretty interesting. The program kind of ultimately fell apart because of a change in leadership, and they decided to cut it. But I kind of kept doing it myself for a while, and then I transitioned out, which is probably one of your other questions. So I finished, so I was working as an engineer. It was good. It was good work. I liked it because it was interesting. I didn't feel like it was exactly what I wanted to do. I looked forward to coaching YMCA soccer and basketball on the weekends more than I looked forward to going to my job. And I thought to myself, I'd rather really look forward to going to my job. So it felt just a little bit too removed from humanity in some sense, the engineering did. At least like the effect on humanity that I really felt like I was called to. So I ended up meeting somebody and dating her, and then we were doing this long distance thing, and then I just was like, okay, we got to get in the same city. So I actually quit my job in the middle of the recession, which maybe wasn't the wisest thing to do, but it just felt like the right thing, and felt like God was kind of calling me in that direction. So I moved. I looked for a job. I thought, I got an engineering degree. I went to Notre Dame. You know, I feel like I'm pretty smart. I'll be fine. Couldn't find a job, so so I was jobless for a good part of the year. I just would bounce around with different temporary job postings. Yeah, the relationship ended like a month after I got down there. So here I am, no friends, no job. Yeah, so it was a really tough time in my life, but I'm really grateful for the people I've met, the community I met there. I learned to salsa dance, which was great. And then did a whole bunch of odd jobs that really helped me appreciate what it's like to be jobless and to have a whole bunch of skills, but nobody that feels like they want that or that they can't hire for the time. So I feel like I have a lot more sympathy for people that are unemployed. A couple of the things that I did that I think were really interesting. One of them was I was in a call center, and so you'd sit 14 hours a day at a desk, and this call center would flash on the TV and like a programming thing, they'd flash, do you have bipolar? Call this number for a free medical trial. And so the commercial would flash, and then we'd get all these calls. So I get my headset and my keyboard and my computer screen, all of us in this office, all like 30 of us, getting these calls, and we would walk people through questionnaires. So it'd be like 5-6 pages of questions in order to find the right person so they could have like a control group and then a group that actually did the medicine. So this one person calls me, bipolar ad, and I go through, and after a while like what questions they need to ask or answer which way. So it was like the second question, I was like, he's not gonna make it. But we have to go through the whole thing or else they'll kind of catch on, and so the people that were telling us, they said that you just got to keep going through the whole thing. So I went through the 5 other pages and got to the end. I was like, okay, how am I going to say this to this guy that he didn't qualify for this test that he probably thinks he really needs? So I say, yeah, it looks, I'm sorry to say that it looks like, you're not quite what they're looking for in this test. I hope you do all right and, find the help you need. And long pause at the other end, and I'm like, oh, shoot. And then I hear this, I guess I'm not as bad as I thought I was. Click. Which is great. I mean, that's a great attitude, but it was such a relief to me. So that was a really memorable experience from that job. I also worked for the United States Census for a couple months in Austin. So it was a desk job, so it was less glamorous than it sounds. I got really good at using a bar scanner. So I'd have to scan these, they'd go out in the field, they'd take their surveys, and they'd come back with a box full of papers, and I just would do the beep, beep, going through all these papers. So that was less fun. More fun, a couple of times they let us go out and we'd actually have to count homeless. So we'd go out in the kind of the backwoods of Austin and talk to people, and we'd see like a tent and we'd ask, do you know who lives here? So that was pretty cool too. It was cool to have that interaction. I guess little did I know that these were all seeds kind of leading to where I am now. I think those are probably the most memorable. Oh, and then I was a substitute teacher. I had a friend that said, "Hey, why don't you do substitute teaching? You need a job, et cetera." I thought I'd be an engineer for 30 years, retire early at 55, and then do substitute teaching as a way to just earn some extra income. Both my parents were educators. So I did substitute teaching, and something just clicked. I just loved it. I just would grin ear to ear, cinching up my tie in the morning, looking in the mirror, and then going off and spending a day with kids. There was just something really beautiful that kind of spoke to me. So then that's why I came back to Notre Dame and did the Alliance for Catholic Education program. So the Alliance for Catholic Education, the ACE program, has a discernment retreat every year. The question of priesthood and religious life was something that I'd say I would dismiss really quickly in middle school and high school. I don't feel like there's a lot there, maybe a little bit. Then in college, same sort of thing. I was like, nah, not like dating too much. And then working a little bit, I think leaving Notre Dame actually created, I didn't realize how much Notre Dame provides a faith background. It just kind of like hums in the background. And so once you leave, just like when you leave like a noisy place of something humming, you realize, oh my gosh, that thing was really noisy. So for me, it was realizing that Notre Dame provided this wonderful faith background that I was now missing. So I was looking for ways to fill that. So I'd read like the Australian, what's his name? Matthew Kelly. And I would read the Catechism, and I'd like find like this beauty that I just didn't even know that was there. So I was doing that kind of in the background when I was at Rolls-Royce. Moved to Texas. The person I moved for was a really faithful Catholic, so I think I grew a lot. I no longer thought that rosaries and adoration was something that weird people did, which is what I thought before. And my parents, we had a good family. We basically prayed before dinner and went to Mass on the weekend, so I don't know. I mean, it's just kind of what we did. Yeah, so it kind of grew through that. My time in Austin, met a great group of friends, also really faith-filled. And then going into the ACE program, there's this discernment retreat. And I actually went up to Montreal at the time of St. Andre Bissette's canonization. So he's the only Holy Cross saint currently. I hadn't really thought about Holy Cross. I figured if I was going to be a priest, it was going to be a Jesuit, just because I really like their formation, their interest in education. There's also a name factor, you know. So I thought about being a Marine when I was in high school, and it was mostly just because I wanted to be the best at whatever I did, and I figured they were. So Holy Cross just started, you know, making its way into my brain. I didn't understand that Holy Cross, that Notre Dame was actually a cross founded by the Congregation of Holy Cross, or that it was a school founded by the congregation. So I had some great, wonderful conversations with some Holy Cross priests at that discernment retreat, and then it's like 3 years later, I finally was like, okay, I'm ready to try it out, right? So when I was in Rolls-Royce, when I was working for them, I don't know that I thought a lot about my faith in terms of at the work itself, but it was certainly there. I think it was there in the way in which I would try to make the guys that were grumpy on the floor just a little bit happier, or the people I was working with in a meeting, making sure that like we're doing the right thing as opposed to the easy thing. Or listening to people when they had something they wanted to complain about, even though I had a million other things that I could have done. So I think in that way, the faith that we do can be a really subtle thing, but a hugely important thing, that it distinguishes us some way, like being Christian ought to make us look a little different to the world. And so bringing that faith perspective into what other job, because, you know, some people are called to be priests, some are called to be brothers, some sisters, but a lot of people are just called to go into the world and be a really good engineer, someone who cares for other people, or a really good lawyer or whatever, or even, you know, things that we don't really think about a lot, like a carpenter or plumber. Like the world needs a bunch of people that are just really kind, good people that bring their faith forward in those kind of small ways. You know, what engineering did is it taught me how to think and how to problem solve. There's a lot of problems to be solved in the world. The nice thing about I guess studying theology is realizing how much that's just up to God to solve it. That's not up to me, which is really important, because we can easily, even in whatever field, but even as a seminarian or a priest, we can think that it all depends on me. Like, I need to do X, Y, Z, and we kind of burden ourselves with this idea, like almost like a guilt that we place upon ourselves, which clearly isn't from God. But what engineering's allowed me to do is to look at a problem and say, okay, here's what's going on. The root cause analysis training that I did in Rolls-Royce was always looking at why did it happen and why did the structure allow that thing to happen. So it was always this twofold. So it wasn't just that the part was scratched. It was like, what is our process doing that a part can be scratched? So I like to look at problems, like if I'm looking at a parish and saying our attendance is low, I'm not only going to ask the question, why is the attendance low, but like why is our church community such that low attendance is even possible? So that's a big part. I think going into seminary and studying theology, It's been cool, I think, to come from an engineering perspective, because I bring a different way of looking at theological questions than somebody that came in straight as a theologian, because they're already kind of shaped and that sort of thing. So I can ask questions maybe that are more critical, or just have a slightly different spin. This is related, but maybe tangentially, but we'll get there. I really am kind of in love with this quote that the world doesn't need another Francis of Assisi and doesn't need another Mother Teresa. The world needs a bunch of individuals that step into themselves, that are true to who they are, who do what they want to do and what they feel like called to do, or what they feel like the most sense of joy and consolation. The world needs those people. So if you're an engineer, awesome. Engineering is a great field. Do it well. Bring the joy of Christ to your work. Treat other people with respect. Do the right thing as opposed to the easy thing. And also remember that it's ultimately not about you and us. It's about God. And so as much as we try to do the right thing, that's good. A lot of it's just getting out of the way and not allowing ourselves to become a burden in whatever way that looks like. Thinking about religious life or priesthood, hugely important to pray. In prayer, think of it as a conversation with God. It needs to be a conversation, two-way. So it's good to do things like rosaries and prayers where we're Our Fathers and those sort of things. But taking time just to be quiet and listen is really important. I had a friend that was really big into a particular saint. He had a devotion to Saint Therese of Lisieux, and he talked about, he imagines going to a coffee shop with her and like talking. So saints are great, you can have like a conversation with your patron saint or whatever, but make sure that you're spending time talking but also listening. Like all of us kind of have people that we know that just talk all the time. Kind of like, it feels like that's what I'm doing right now. As opposed to listening, you want to listen and make sure that you understand where the person's coming from. So that's really important. Spiritual direction is really important. So having someone that you can talk to about the movements of the Spirit, because it's different than decision making. The Spirit can be really easy to tell, like when we're really joyful and happy and we feel like things are going well. But it can also be the case that sometimes when things aren't going well, that's actually the good Spirit telling us to change direction or do something else. That can be really confusing. I recommend anything Timothy Gallagher writes. This one is Discerning the Will of God. He has one on discernment of spirits and other things. He's not paying me to say this, but he's excellent. Timothy Gallagher is really good, but it's no substitute for a spiritual director, someone that can actually talk to you one-on-one. Yeah, know that you're loved. God just loves all of us immensely, and I think it's easy for us to forget that. So know you're loved. And also know that it's okay to make mistakes. That we all make mistakes. That we're never perfect. We can try as hard as we can, but we'll still screw something up at some point. And just trust and know that God loves you anyways. Like He created you. So I love this prayer. It's kind of a spin off of Teresa of Avila, who I think the story goes that she fell out of a carriage one time and fell in the mud. And she looked up to heaven and she said, Lord, if this is how you treat your friends, it's no wonder that you have so few. Like that's a beautiful prayer, because it's honest, it's heartfelt, it's telling so like a prayer like, God, I really screwed it up. If you want like this thing to work out, whatever project it is you're working on, you're going to need to help me be better because you created me. Like that's great. That's honest. Or like I'm really ticked at you. Like that's a good prayer too, because it's conversation. Like I think Saint John Paul II said the opposite of love isn't hate. The opposite of love is indifference. So in relationships, it's when we stop going to the table, when we stop coming to someone and saying to them, I'm upset with you. If we don't do that, we just ignore them and like avoid them. Like that's not good. That's not good for a relationship. I like thinking about the GPS, the little arrow, the blue arrow. And you know, when you're sitting in a parking lot, the arrow is kind of like twitching and it's not really sure like where direction you're pointed. But as soon as you start making concrete steps, then it can say, okay, like here's your path. Or it can say, you need to recalculate. It's the same with us. I mean, we need to take small concrete steps in any discernment. So one thing that might be helpful for a job in particular is imagining yourself in the job. So someone had told me once, you got to play out the tape. So like take a day or two if you have it, hopefully, to think about what it's going to be like in the job. Maybe talk to a couple people that are in the company, but not someone that's your direct employee or employer. Ask, is this something I can see myself doing? Like try it on for size mentally. And then if it's a good feeling, great, go with it. If it's not, then like be cautious and maybe look elsewhere. Sometimes when the decisions between two goods are there's like an impasse, sometimes it means that our scope's not big enough, that we're too zoomed in and we just need to take a broader picture. That happened for me in like choosing my ministry for this year. So I'm at a high school and I'm loving what I'm doing, but I was choosing between two other things. And I was really struggling. I was like, like this one, like both had like some pretty significant negative things and both had some positive. But as soon as I opened up, I'm like, oh, like that's where I need to go. I feel like sometimes we can lock in too fast to what we want to do or what we think we're being called to do. You're loved. You're loved.